Hi, everybody, and welcome back. We are now going to be discussing something that every first responder will experience in high volume, and that is you're going to come across a lot of people with substance use disorders. So I'm going to introduce you to some of the substances, some of the symptomology of their behaviors, likely actions while they're utilizing these substances, and how you can respond. So you're going to come across people who are intoxicated all the time, right? Doesn't matter what kind of a first responder you are. It's important to understand the difference of behaviors that you can expect when they're intoxicated, because certainly those behaviors are wildly different from when somebody is in a sober state. It's also really important to understand addiction and substance abuse and substance dependence. A lot of criminal activity, a lot of aggressive behavior and violent behavior happens while under the influence, whether it's alcohol or drug use. So there's a lot of opportunity here for police, for firemen, for EMS, for all kinds of first responders to be engaging with people who are under the influence. In addition, especially that now that we are in the age of the opioid epidemic, overdoses are increasingly common calls for first responders, and this unfortunately has only gotten worse, and we don't see it mitigating anytime soon. So psychoactive substances such as drugs and alcohol are going to alter perception. It's going to alter brain function. It's going to alter mood, decision making, and consciousness, right? So certainly all the things that you need to make good decisions are lacking in that circumstance. And this is going to result in aberrant behavior that frequently results in encounters with first responders. So we're going to start with depressants, and alcohol is, our heavy hitter here. It's the most commonly used drug in the world. It has disinhibitory effects that make people more outgoing, less restricted in their behavior, a little willy-nilly in the stuff that they do, or more extroverted. But often these effects will then morph into impaired judgment, impaired motor function, the inability to walk correctly, to drive a car, to operate machinery, sensory impairments such as blurred vision, which is also going to inhibit your ability to physically function, and aggressive and violent behaviors. Excessive use results in eroding the liver, the kidneys, the pancreas, etc. Brain dysfunction for your really long-term, really intense alcohol users you can start to see alcohol-induced dementia. Users develop a tolerance, a really high tolerance. It's amazing how much someone can drink and how long they can drink before their body really kicks out. But that is a major concern, especially to first responders. And when we try to get individuals treatment and rehabilitation with alcohol, this is one of the few drugs you cannot go cold turkey from. When you have developed a physical dependence and that tolerance on alcohol that is beyond a certain point, cold turkey can immediately result in death very quickly when somebody is drying out. So they literally have to be weaned off of alcohol. More specifically, in a controlled medical environment, they are given medication that keeps them from having that violent withdrawal that could result in death. So that's an important thing to know. It's not something somebody who, like when somebody's an alcoholic, they can't just stop, right? Literally, they'll literally die, right? It's a process, okay? Stimulants. Want to talk about amphetamines here, which is going to increase heart rate, it's going to increase blood pressure, decrease appetite, it's going to provide exceptional amounts of energy. Long-term use can result in psychosis, which we've already talked about. So you know what psychosis is, and it can be triggered by amphetamine use. People who are in psychosis under the influence of amphetamines are going to have delusions, hallucinations, extreme paranoia, which can many times make them aggressive and dangerous. Ecstasy, speed, methamphetamine are all things that fall into the stimulant category of amphetamines. And over the past 2 or 3 decades, we've seen a noteworthy increase in the manufacture of methamphetamine in home labs, which is extremely dangerous to first responders. First of all, police, EMS, firefighters, you have no idea what's going on into a house that you're going to walk into. You have no idea, right? There are huge explosion dangers, explosive dangers, and you don't know, whatever the call could be for anything completely unrelated, but you don't know what's in that person's basement, in that person's house. So you want to be aware of that. Take all precautions possible. We've seen an increase in amphetamine use in the past 2-3 decades, especially interestingly enough, with, soccer moms is what they call it, is because it, it suppresses the appetite, it increases weight loss, and it also gives you endless energy for moms who work full time and have kids and have to take care of the house. This became a thing for a really long time that really brought it into mainstream middle America. So you want to keep that in mind, that it's still very pervasive. Cocaine is also a stimulant. This is a powder substance that creates strong feelings of euphoria and energy. However, it wears off very quickly. So you have to use a lot of it to continually experience that high. Out of cocaine can be created or developed crack cocaine, of which we had an epidemic in the 1980s. Crack cocaine is, or rock cocaine, as it's sometimes referred to, is simply the addition of water and heat, and the changes the composition of the drug. It also changes the high. It makes the high incredibly intense. It can be smoked in, it's typically smoked in a crack pipe. It enters the bloodstream almost immediately, and it's incredibly, incredibly addictive. Tolerance also builds instantly. So the interesting thing about crack cocaine use is that the person's best high will be their first experience with crack cocaine. That first time they smoke, they are going to feel unbelievable, but they're also immediately building a tolerance, which means the next high isn't going to be as amazing, and the next high after that is going to be even less amazing, and less amazing, and less amazing, while it continues to destroy the body, erode behaviors, and make people, aggressive, violent, and live the lifestyle of having to obtain those drugs repeatedly. But interestingly, they forever will spend their lives chasing that first high. Aggressive behaviors and sexual behaviors are strongly affiliated with crack use, as are property crimes and violent crimes, to fund the habit. Paranoia, agitation, inability to concentrate are all symptoms, and decreased life function is huge. There's no way to be a crack smoker, a regular crack smoker, and maintain your quality of life. But let's switch gears to opioids, because that really is at the center of our problems right now, culturally speaking, with drugs. This is really dominating the landscape. And opioids are a family of drugs that incorporate natural opiates. And natural opiates are going to be things like opium, morphine, heroin, etc. All of those substances mimic the body's natural endorphins, and our natural endorphins are our body's feel-good drugs. It's what our brain releases when something happens to us that causes us pain. Our brain releases that natural painkiller to help bring down the pain. So heroin, let's start with heroin, which can be snorted, injected, inhaled. It can be swallowed. Tolerance builds quickly, as does dependence. Increased amounts are required to meet that tolerance. And something that's very important for first responders to understand is that once somebody becomes a heroin addict, frequently they're literally spending their days just trying to not get into withdrawal, because they've raised that tolerance so high that you need a certain amount just to not go into withdrawal. And the withdrawal symptoms from heroin are terrible. I mean, there's shaking, there's seizures, there's sweating, there's nausea, there's diarrhea. You feel like you're going to die, right? And so most of the time, they're not even getting high. They're just getting enough to avoid going into withdrawal, right? And every time you use, you need more and more and more to, A, not get sick, which is what they call it getting well, right? To not get sick. But B, if they want to obtain a high, they have to get even more. So it's a vicious drug. Many heroin addicts will overdose and will succumb to respiratory failure and cardiac arrest. With the introduction of incredibly addictive painkillers such as OxyContin, we saw our nation undergo a massive opioid epidemic. The prescription drugs were being handed out, unfortunately, with far too much ease for people who didn't need them. People were told that they were not addictive, when in fact they were wildly addictive. And by the time everything got under control and we got the prescription supply minimized, people were already horrendously addicted. And so they turned to street level opioids to feed their addiction, because they couldn't get their prescription opioids anymore. Unfortunately, and this is where they start using heroin, because they can't get their prescription drugs anymore. Unfortunately, in tandem with this, we've also seen the introduction of fentanyl widespread into our illegal drug supply. Fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin. It's got an even more destructive, what I call sister, which is carfentanil, which is 5,000 times stronger than heroin, if you can even comprehend that. incredibly dangerous to drug users, community members, and first responders alike. Fentanyl is often in heroin and other illegal drugs. It's used to cut the drug, to expand the supply so that the dealers can, have greater supply and make more money. People are often not trying to use fentanyl. They assume they're using heroin, or they assume they're snorting cocaine, and they overdose from the fentanyl that's in there, because it's just so potent and so powerful and so toxic. Narcan is the first responders' go-to. It blocks, for a short period of time, it blocks opioid receptors. So it doesn't, it literally gets in there and says, no, the opioid effects can't get in here, but it wears off and then it moves away and the opioids can go right back in. So you can bring somebody out of an overdose for a period of time and they might slide right back into it when the Narcan wears off. Oftentimes, people need multiple hits of Narcan before we can even keep them conscious. This is really a Band-Aid from when we find somebody who's overdosed. It's a Band-Aid to keep them alive, keep their heart beating, get their respiration going long enough to get them into a hospital where we can stabilize them. But it's very common, and it's too common, right? There's a lot of concerns here. One is oftentimes when people have been administered Narcan, it's not uncommon for them to come up swinging, right? There's often an aggressive response. They're often angry, right? That is not uncommon. They're angry because now I have to find more substance to use because you just ruined my high. So there's that concern for first responders of all kinds. There's also just the concern that if you're around people who are using heroin, you have no idea if it's been cut with fentanyl or carfentanil. The amount of fentanyl or carfentanil required to produce overdose and imminent death is minuscule. I mean, it's so small. It's so small. And all it takes is, a windy day and for some to blow into a first responder's eye, and it would be immediately absorbed into the bloodstream and you'd start experiencing respiratory failure. So there's a lot of risks that first responders undergo when dealing with drug users, people who have overdosed, when dealing with dealers that may be in possession of either of these substances, and you just have no idea. You have no idea if it's in a substance or not. For people who are first responders and who arguably don't use opioids, you have zero tolerance. So the minute that you are exposed to this, it just overwhelms your body, and it's very, very quick death. So it's really important for you to always have Narcan, not just for people in the community, but also on your person for yourself in case you ever have to self-administer or administer to a partner. Also, and like I said, fentanyl, carfentanil, it can be through inhalation, it can be through ingestion. Any exposure to any mucous membrane, so we're talking the eyes, we're talking your sinuses, etc. It's going to absorb, right? It's also possible for canine units. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of canines who go into circumstances and on the floor or in the carpet, there is, of somewhere where people have been using or where people are manufacturing or selling, there are remnants of fentanyl or carfentanil. It absorbs through the dog's paws on the pads on their paws, and they will go into immediate overdose, or it absorbs through their noses, through their eyes, through their mucous membranes, and they will very quickly go into respiration failure and cardiac failure. So a lot of things to really be hyper aware of there and make sure that you're always prepared, if for no other reason than for you and your fellow workers. Hallucinogenics, these are natural or synthetic substances that alter sensations, perceptions, emotions, etc. Your cognitions. It can result in paranoia. This can lead to erratic and aggressive behaviors. Marijuana is a dicey situation right now because it is still illegal at the federal level, but many, many states have legalized it and are not enforcing laws against it. So whether it's for medical use or recreational use, good 30 states out of the union are allowing it in some capacity. It can result in paranoia. It can result in lack of motivation, lack of concentration, memory issues, irritability, depression, etc. But I think the biggest issue here is that first responders need to have an idea of what the law is in your state and in your locality. What is the guidance? Are you enforcing, or is there decriminalization? Anabolic steroids is another one that I bring up just because it's becoming more common, especially among the male population. In recent decades, especially with the advent of social media, we've seen an uptick in people that are concerned with their appearance. which used to be primarily affiliated with the female population. It has now slid into the male population as well. Everybody wants to look amazing online. Everybody wants to get likes. Everybody wants to get followers. So we're seeing more and more men make use of illegal anabolic steroids to get more muscular, to be more trimmed, more toned. However, there is a consequence that comes with the use of anabolic steroids, and that is severe mood swings, severe aggression, and violence. Right. So certainly that has all the elements required for instances where first responders are going to be called. For the longest time, drug use of any kind was viewed culturally as a moral weakness, but we've moved away from that, that it's not just that you make bad decisions and you don't have good willpower, right? Because we realize it's not that simple, that there are physical dependencies that people with the strongest will in the world couldn't break. And we have moved towards what we call the disease model. And the disease model recognizes the biological predispositions and deficits that make certain people very vulnerable to addiction. Some people are physically notably more vulnerable to addiction than others. And when you combine that with environmental stressors, that predisposition with environmental distressors, and then people start using alcohol and drugs to self-medicate or to numb themselves, it's a recipe for disaster. So once there is that physical tolerance, decision-making and rational thought are gone, right? People can absolutely want to quit and be done, but their bodies will hurt so badly it will drive their behavior to feed that addiction. So the physical addiction has to be broken first. They have to clean out and dry out, and they have to do it under proper supervision, right? So you're going to come across people who are, especially first responders, police officers who make the arrest. You're going to put somebody in a jail cell for a weekend, and you're going to find real quick, they're addicted because right now they don't have a supply, and they're going through what we call dope sickness, which is withdrawal, right? Which is very, very painful. Most substance users are self-medicating for some sort of untreated or undiagnosed mental illness. So that's important to keep in mind. It's their coping mechanism. It's not a successful coping mechanism. And those underlying issues have to be dealt with. So we have to get the physical addiction broken first. And then once the physical dependency is gone, then we have to look at those underlying issues of mental illness or trauma. Why did you start using it in the first place? How can we build better coping mechanisms and get away from this very unsuccessful and detrimental coping mechanisms? So formal inpatient rehab programs are available, 12-step programs and therapies focused on drug addiction in an attempt for people to be able to gain control over drug addiction. It's important as first responders to have an idea of what's available in your local geographic area so that when you come across these people, you have resources to offer them.